Hello, and welcome to Irish Opera Podcast. I'm Kevin Neville, and by starting this podcast, I hope to connect audiences to the artists that create opera here in Ireland and grow the audience by making opera feel more accessible. For now, there will be a podcast at least every month, but if you'd like to support the podcast, help it grow and become more regular, you can go to patreon.com/Irish Opera Podcast and become a patron for as little as $1 a month. If you want to make a once-off donation, you can do so via PayPal. Just email irishoperapodcast@gmail.com for details. Make sure to follow on social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Going forward, I'll be posting upcoming guests on those platforms and taking listeners' questions to make the show more interactive. So I'm hoping we can create a fun and inclusive dialogue. The upcoming production of Aida by Verdi at the Bórd Gáis Energy Theatre takes place on Saturday 24th, Tuesday 27th, Thursday 29th November, and Saturday the 1st of December. Tickets start at just €16, with the best seats in the house being 86, so there's something for everyone. Speaking of Aida, let's cut to this week's guest. Today I'm joined by four-time Best Opera Production winner at the Irish Times Irish Theatre Awards, Michael Barker-Caven. So how did you end up getting into opera?
It was back in 2006. I was asked by the then, still the head of, retiring head of Wexford Festival Opera to come down and direct something for the first time, and it was a kind of a shock. Not that I wasn't ready for it, but that I didn't know that I was looking for it. I'd grown up kind of fearful of opera, only because I'd had a parent, my dad, who was mad into opera. We had it rammed down our throats 24/7, and of course that made me just hate it on principle.
Of course, teenage rebellion.
So all of that stuff. And so by the time, I'd grown up in the mid-30s, as one eventually does, I was quietly already in love with the art form, but in a private sense, listening to the music. And it was something I was becoming more interested in, the idea of that directing it would be really interesting. And he came and saw a show I was directing at the time at Project Art Centre called The Goat by Edward Albee, a truly operatic piece, you could say, about a man in love with a goat, and it seemed to make total sense to do opera after that. And of course, being a complete innocent, when he ended up being Wexford, he said, right, I'd love you to come down and do a piece for us, and I'm going to give you this unheard of American opera called Transformations by Conrad Sousa. And I looked at it and thought, this looks my cup of tea. Everybody else said it was impossible. And I thought, no, this looks proper theatre. It was 10 kind of grim fairy stories told through the eye of a beat poet called Anne Sexton. So it was grown-up fairy stories. And I walked into the room with a plan to do with how we would do it. No idea if opera singers would respond to this plan, because it was, in a sense, a very theatrical plan, because the piece needed it.
Yeah.
And I had to learn on the spot. Thankfully, I had the most incredible cast of singers, Irish and American singers, who were game on, young cast who were just game on. They knew, having taken on the piece, that they needed to do it in a very unique kind of way. And we had an absolute ball, and I had to learn the hard way in the room, all the etiquettes and all the particularities of it, but that was easy in the sense that everybody was so accommodating, and we had a fabulous time, and I just loved every second of it. And getting to work dramatically with music is something I've always loved doing. I realise now, looking back, I was preparing to be an opera director without knowing it. Every piece of theatre I did, I used to basically approach it from the point of view saying, if I can't find the score, because I used to design my own sound score for everything, I can't do the piece. And so I was already directing everything through music. And it was that love of the joining of a story and live music that just thrilled me. And then discovering, of course, that all the cliches that theatre people have about opera singers was total nonsense. Not only were they technically astonishing artists in their capacity to make this mad sound out of their bodies, but they could act the socks off as well, and when given the right environment, wanted to show that skill. And so after that, I then got asked back to Wexford to do another remarkable piece called The Mines of Sulphur by Sir Richard Rodney Bennett, which was just, again, a feast and a delight to do. So I was hooked, basically, by then, and then kind of began to get a few phone calls from various people abroad and stuff, and it became just bit by bit more and more, to the point where now, I have to be honest, I'm an opera director, not a theatre director, but I'm very glad to have had that training in theatre, because I do think that opera at its best needs to be treated with the same kind of intensity of purpose that theatre directors tend to bring. I mean, opera directors traditional opera directors tend to come through a very different path, and they don't seem to care about the libretto, and they don't seem to care about the motivations or the characters, and they just come up with ideas like balance custard pies on your head, because I said so, and all that kind of stuff. And opera
sounds like German, no?
Very German.
Opera in space.
But I think opera is the most exciting live art form, and when you treat it seriously on its face value, and you deal with what is often the most fantastic combination of story, dramatic content and scale, then you have, as a director, the ultimate in toys to play with, and so I just love it. It's a real pleasure.
And is it really different working with actors than singers? The fact that, singers come into the room knowing everything, knowing their music, knowing their text, already having, I suppose, an idea of who the character is that they're portraying. Whereas kind of actors come in, they don't also have the musical information of, the tone and the sound world that's been created and the motivation that's in the music. So, they have to figure out what the motivation is for each line. Is it different working with actors and putting a piece together to singers?
I think they're very different and very similar. The differences are the ones you've just spoken about, which is most actors would fear doing that completely. They think that the only way they can get ownership over it is by discovering it for themselves. Well, obviously, a composer has discovered every nuance essentially for them already by scoring the piece dramatically to fit exactly where they are emotionally and mentally at any given time. So a singer's instinct, if they're tuned to that, will know much quicker than an actor often will. An actor will have to spend time digging around in what we call the subtext and discussion. So you do a lot more talking because you're trying to bring up to the surface the score, which an opera already has. The difference is that you have to have the awareness and perhaps the accumulated dramatic skill to be able to identify and care about the fact that the composer has done that. And I think because I did a lot of Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is a score. Every Shakespeare play is written literally like a piece of music. Every word is there in the rhythmic pattern that it's set to create a specific tonal impact. That's often lost in modern productions because people don't understand that anymore. Yeah. And so I've always loved that, because I think the greatest combination of live performance is when you get a fantastic balance between form and content. And the form is, in a sense, the structure. And in music, you obviously have a very firm structure set by the musical score. But the content, the livingness, the wildness inside that is the wonderful balancing act between that place. And when you can get that right, you get an electrifying feeling of something being made for the first and only time in front of you, but it's so carved and shaped that every moment and every nuance is there and revealed in a manner that you can really feel and experience as a watcher or as a participant in the making. And that's what makes it so thrilling. I think a lot of theatre people just have the wrong idea about opera, and a lot of it comes from this word tradition. There's this sort of faux idea that opera is a fake art form, when it's actually the most complete art form theatrically, because everything is there.
Yeah. And when we were talking earlier, I asked you, is this a traditional production? Because that tends to be the question directors hate getting, and get more often than not, I think, than anything else. So what is your take on Aida for this production, and how did you approach it?
By not being traditional. I fear that word, because it's the word for traditional means it's dead. Yeah. It's all predetermined. It's stuck in time. It fits a pattern. It ticks boxes. It doesn't make anything at risk or at stake. It's safe. Tradition means it's safe, so that someone can actually fall asleep through it, go home, clap, and not notice they went to it. Yeah. I want people to come to something that's vivid and alive and immediate and skillful by everybody involved, and brilliant to look at, but actually raises feelings, thoughts, ideas, challenges in front of you that makes actually you feel as if you're alive, that the questions are being asked of you in the best sense of that word as an audience member. So when I came on towards sort of thinking how I do Aida, I was up against the impediment of seeing a number of productions of Aida that left me cold, simply because you could see there was a sort of fixed idea about how you do it, even within the choices that each made. that the very setting of it in this sort of pseudo-Egyptian ancient world is a trap.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it was anything Verdi was particularly interested in. You know, in his own writings, he's very discursive and nigh contemptible on the whole idea of the grandeur of the Egyptian empire. He had a commission that meant he had to write it in an Egyptian setting, but I don't think he was writing from any creative point of view of love for or interest in it. He saw it as a mechanism to talk about empires. And as an Italian at the time, you know, whose work was very much bound up with the idea of creating a strong Italian national identity that could help them feel the courage and the sense of self to pull away from the age-old control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and to form a new Italy. And when he wrote this piece, they were in the middle of what was to be 4 wars of independence, which he and his compatriots in making his work were all heavily involved. And I think he was writing about the power of empire as an oppositional force to truth, that actually the truth of an empire is that they're hubristic, they're greedy, they're paranoid, they're fixed, they're avaricious, they're blind, and within that, the heartbeat of the soul of humanity gets lost, and the people who dare to struggle against that line of being invariably end up having immense challenges, and their lives can fall apart around them. But in the end, then their search for their own personal integrity is more important than giving way and becoming a machine cog. And you know, he gives incredible musical luster on the surface to some of the big scenes which appear to be homages to the big empire. But if you look at them carefully, the way he's dramatically staged them, what he's implicitly saying is that there is something profoundly wrong about this grandiosity of being, and this titanic force that pits political and religious power side by side, forges them into a kind of eternal partnership of control, and everybody has to follow their rules, and including, you know, subtle things he does in the libretto when he introduces the idea that here's this huge empire, this hugely powerful country being threatened by this tiny people who are making them so frightened and paranoid. And it's the oldest saying in history: if you have trouble at home or you're fearful of your state of power at home, you go to war abroad. And they pick an enemy who's so small. And the libretto introduces it that it is rumoured we have been attacked. And that word rumour throughout literature has always been a code for this is what we today call fake news.
And we have seen all of this happen in Ireland, like the power dynamic that you've just spoken about there with politics and religion being wrapped up together. I mean, the church and state in Ireland couldn't be closer together. And over the past century, you know, we've seen horrendous abuses happen with the laundries, with the boys' schools, with all the sorts of things that have happened. So this story really isn't stuck in this capsule of time of ancient Egypt. And the actual story itself, we don't know exactly when it's pinpointed in history. I mean, it could be anywhere in the 3,000 years of ancient Egypt. The people who discover the story, the archaeologists who uncovered a tomb and found this story, they didn't actually know when exactly it was. So Verdi wrote it for his time, and now we're presenting it to our time. But a lot of the human truths are still the same now. And you know, you spoke about the Freemasons, and some of the symbology in our production comes from that.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's worth saying that the reason the way the piece has this extraordinary power structure between the priesthood and the political world, when I looked at that priesthood, I thought, how could I make that have the same kind of impact today? Because obviously people were monks walking around stage, or Egyptian, you know, priests would have no meaning. But there have been secret brotherhoods that have been intertwined with the political system since literally the beginnings of time in terms of history. And obviously the sort of orders like the Masonic order, their iconography is hugely influenced by Egypt. So if you walk into any Masonic lodge and look around, virtually everything you will see will be in many ways derived from ancient Egypt, because they looked back to that time of the great empire and the kind of sense of the great architect Ra, who is the god, was seen as the great crafter of the universe, and that everything was measured, everything was seen, everything was marked, and that they were participants in the delivery of that power by controlling it on Earth. And I've read a lot through my time as a historian, which is my original training. In sort of the underbelly of history, there is an enormous body of work that is unsurprisingly relatively suppressed by the mainstream, which proves categorically beyond any doubt that secret societies have played the defining role in human history, not a bit part, but the defining role, and have always been present through a continuity of time. There's always a bit of argument amongst Masons publicly about the fact that the Masonic Order, it was really an 18th century creation. It was not. It was the continuation of a millennia-old tradition that all through history would bubble up into a form of public awareness, but was an ever constant, and that secrecy has been an essential part of power politics since we created power politics itself. And so I wanted to formulate a group of, should we say, religiously orientated people, because a lot of the secret societies have what you might call religious underbellies, especially in their ritual, in their practices, but that was also quite clearly not something that was hidden away and separate, that was ever present. And so, for example, people walk around, in places and they see black and white marble floors in large sort of, government buildings, and they don't realize this is a Masonic symbol and has been understood as a spiritual power symbol for a long time. That black and white, literally next to each other, not separate in two halves, but actually touching off each other all the time. The negative and the positive are two essences of the same power source, and the question always is, how do you use it? So we're trained through Christianity to think of good and evil as opposites. In a lot of these traditions, the understanding is subtly different, which is the power to be, shall we say, of the light or of the dark are equally as valid as each other. It is purely a moral, shall we say, imperative as to which path you choose, neither of which, shall we say, is lesser or greater than the other in an objective sense. They both give you opportunities for immense development. You can just go as deep into the shadows as you want, or you can go as hard towards the light if you want. That's the path less traveled. But the fact that these powers live literally right next to each other is something that people just don't understand, and that you walk upon the floor, in your public library, that is telling you that your world is controlled in a completely different way than you understand it. And this sort of, mentality of how if you look at the dollar bill, which is like a lot of American power politics, is riven with Masonic imagery. It contains on it the pyramid with the all-seeing eye at the top. This is a Masonic image. Every president in the United States, when they're sworn into office, they bring a specific Masonic Bible from the lodge to the inauguration, which they all swear upon. And this sort of undercurrent is believed, and I suppose you could say to our listeners, you may not believe this sort of stuff. You think it may be mumbo jumbo. Well, the trouble with it is that there are, huge numbers of very powerful people who absolutely believe in this and live this life quietly underneath the surface of the mask.
And we see it in public life today with Scientology, like huge millionaire celebrities in Hollywood with, a huge amount of influential power are very obviously in the public eye, yet at the same time, what they are doing behind the scenes, we can't really tell, and it does have an impact. Like Leah Remini has recently done an expose documentary on it, and it was while I was watching that, and you brought up the Freemason traits of this production in our original meeting, and I thought, God, it's really cyclical. These things keep happening. These things in society keep bubbling up. They keep coming back. We keep bringing ourselves into the same structure. We destroy one structure and we make another one, and it's constantly turning over. And the two parts of this opera really are this society and this tie-up of politics and of religion, but then also this love story. And you spoke earlier about the river that we all get caught up in, and the river, we're talking about the river right now, and the politics and the religion and the context of this production. But who are the people who are caught up in all of this?
Well, we have three individuals fundamentally. A young general who right at and Verdi so brilliantly does this. The very first scene is so simple, and yet inside it contains this fantastic little vignette of what is to come, which is we meet him. He walks onto the stage with a high priest who has an envelope, shall we say, like a lotto ticket envelope, and he's gently wafting it in the air and saying, "Someone has been chosen. A young man has been chosen. Well, I can't tell you who he has, but he has been chosen by the goddess to lead our armies to eventual victory. And I'm off to the king now to tell him who this person is. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink." And it's a fantastic little example of saying X but doing Y, which is quite clearly what you're watching is a man being manipulated and saying, "You're going to be one of our boys. You better toe the line. If you toe the line, you will climb up the ladder." And what this character doesn't grasp, because he's a young man and he thinks in terms of truth and love and honour, is that these people have no honour and they're not interested in the things he's interested in. And if he steps out of line an inch, they will drop him like a stone. And that's essentially what happens to him, because when push comes to shove in the opera and he's forced to make a choice because he's in love with someone from the enemy camp, when he makes a personal choice about that state of integrity, that actually his love for her and her as a person and what she represents has moved him so much that he's willing to stand up for the victims of the opera, the imprisoned captive Ethiopians who are all meant to be butchered. That's the rule. They all have to die, because if one of them gets away, they will come back and revenge. So you chop their heads off and you celebrate and dance around the glory of their blood. And he refuses to do this. And in that instant, he is dropped like a stone. They are looking for an excuse, and they find an excuse, and they end up trying him for treason. And he is therefore a tragic figure who could, in the sense that he is given a moral choice, which is that all the paths, shall we say, leading to glory are the white path, the black paths are there before him, and he could follow those and become someone who's immortalized in a statue and have 50,000 acres of olive trees and live happily ever after. And he chooses the responsibility of the truth, and that he goes for a moral and a heartfelt response, and that brings with it a counter-response from the power system. But in a sense, his eventual tragedy, you could say, is that he's liberated from being a victim of this sort of matrix pattern that otherwise would just turn him into a robot. And I think that's what makes him and his journey so interesting, and how he's caught between these two remarkable female characters. Aida herself, of course, who is pivotal, hence the name of the opera, who is a fascinating character, in obviously herself, in that she is a princess. She's brought up in a royal sort of background, and that usually means that there is some real substance to her making. She's something quite remarkable, but she has to pretend to be a slave. And she has to, no, she's a slave, so she has to pretend that she's an ordinary slave and hide the fact that she is of royal blood. So this is part of this idea in the opera all the time of seeing and not seeing, of the all-seeing eye, of some things are hidden and some things are revealed. And the thing that is revealed is often to disguise that which is more important, that is hidden. And this inner and outer duality between the surface and the secret of one's own being. And so Aida hides her glory to protect not only herself but her people, and also end up to protect Radames, this general who loves her. And she's pitted against this extraordinarily fierce, determined figure of Amneris, who you could say is all lust for life. She's someone who wants all the power, she wants all the glory, she wants the status, she wants to marry this general, become king and queen, take over, do the place properly, and by God, she'll do a good job of it. But actually, she loses her soul on the way. She has so lost her sense of herself that she has sold out to this faux, fake image of what it is to be a human being, because she's so obsessed with what the power gives her. And it's only her unstitching, that this brilliant tragic line of hers is followed, where she loses the thing she realized she most wants, which is this man's love. So it's this brilliant constant juxtaposition between, if you make this choice, that thing happens as well. And most people don't understand that in life. Is that every choice you make is actually two choices. To have, if you choose this, you don't have the other. If you choose that, you won't have the other. And then we fight about, why can't I have both? Because life doesn't work that way.
Why can't I have both? But that's a lot of the influence that's happening externally from the priests and from the politicians. And actually, going back to modern times and how this story is still relevant to us now, the exact same thing happens in Scientology. If one member of the family, leaves the religion, they must be shunned. They cannot be spoken to. You're not allowed to talk to them anymore. And it divides families. So when you decide you're going to leave that religion, even if you no longer believe anymore, so many people will still stay just because they don't want to split their family. It's, do I split my family, or do I, live the life I think I should?
Exactly. And that kind of divide and conquer, I mean, we talked a bit earlier, and we could bring it up, the Romans were brilliant at formulating horrendously all of the pragmatic rules of how you run a totalitarian empire. And one of their favorite simple sayings was cakes and circuses.
Yeah.
The way you control people is that you fill their belly with cheap food, but they feel good, and it being cakes, it's rich, so they feel full of sugary niceness, and they don't realize that it's frying their brains. And then you give them circuses all day long to watch and to shout at and laugh at, and actually meanwhile
be distracted.
You're distracted, and you get on with the rest of the life, which is running the world the way you want it to. And they also came up with the simple policy, which is divide and rule.
Yeah.
Today we are seeing that more and more. Whatever the persuasion, whatever one's ideologies are, left or right, if you stand back from the mess that's going on, the most prevalent thing is saying everybody is being divided from each other. And that is happening on a personal level, on sort of cultural levels, on social levels, and everyone is at war with each other. So that they're so distracted with that, they don't notice that the power system, as always, is tightening its grip on the outside. It's like corralling the sheep into a corner.
I was listening to a podcast recently from Inside Politics from the Irish Times, and they were talking about how Mary Lou MacDonald was bringing up some proposal, some bill, I can't remember exactly what it was about, but Leo Varadkar started comparing her to Marine Le Pen. And they said the media took the bait. They took it and they ran with it, because every single headline the following day was comparing Mary Lou MacDonald and Marine Le Pen. Is she really like her? Why did the Taoiseach say this? And instead of talking about the bill, talking about the issue at hand, the whole thing was a circus about what's Mary Lou MacDonald.
And people think that happens by accident.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It's the best.
And that's what they said. They said it was a prepared statement. It didn't matter what she said or what she was talking about. This would probably have been brought out. Yeah. And it's happening everywhere. We see it with Trump and the Twitter and the tweets. And do we hear much about the Senate and what's actually happening there? No. We hear a million different things about Twitter and the latest ridiculous thing he said. And the same thing is happening with Brexit, and we get all these crazy stories about Theresa May and these, she did such a stupid dance or whatever. And it's like, well, really, who cares? What's actually happening over here? It's all distraction. It's all circuses.
It's all circuses, and people get very good at it. And in this opera, they're very good at it. So we've played with that to show how today, as then, there's a perversity in that kind of work, which is, what always shocks me is that it is so glaringly obvious what's happening. It's thrown in people's faces. There is an esoteric saying which is called hidden in plain sight. And now it's sort of not just hidden in plain sight, it's trumpeted in plain sight. And not talking about any personalities necessarily, that the whole thing is so clearly an engineered circus. And it's so clearly manipulating people left, right and centre. And that sense where we now look, the goalposts have been moved so far that people are losing any form of moral compass of what is, that there is any idea that there are things that are genuinely worth sustaining and holding on to as ideas of the richness and the goodness in human life. It's almost as if we've got this perverse cultural idea that everything ugly is amazing and humans are rubbish, really, so it doesn't matter that we are all as sick as anything in the head, and all these perversions are going on so now gratuitously as the centre ground. So in our opera, the triumphant return is the equivalent of, if this is who we are, let's show ourselves. It is the gratuitous nature of triumph of war. War is the greatest evil brought upon humankind. And now it's seen, thanks to Hollywood and to generations of lies about where wars come from or how they start or who does what behind the circus to make sure that a war happens. We don't realise now, how gratuitously off balance we are in terms of the horrendous cost to us as a species of this war state that we live in, a perpetual sense. We're told now it's eternal, the so-called war on terror will never stop.
The war on drugs.
The war on drugs, the war on Christmas, they'll invent whatever. The Russians, is it the Muslims, is it whoever, constantly creating this bogeyman personality somewhere else for all to be frightened of. Oceania has always been at war, that's the mentality we're heading towards. And this opera completely deals with that, the danger of that to a society, and how it is down to individual people to hold on to their integrity. But it will come at a cost. In some senses, that's what this says.
Yeah. It's if you were to invite someone to their first opera, do you think it would be this one?
I'd like to say yes, because I think the thing to say to people who have an interest but a fear, it's completely okay to be fearful, if that's the right word, of going to see your first one, in the sense that it is a different form of work. You have to start to take it on its own merits rather than trying to say what's it like. And that therefore they are singing in a particular way, they're singing in another language, but don't worry, you'll have all the words that matter put up there.
Yeah.
To trust your own ability to just be with it and enjoy it as a rich and powerful and visually gripping story that you will actually find your way through. And somewhere along that line, somewhere in it, you'll suddenly find that you're completely lost, because the music is so overwhelmingly not only dramatically exciting but also beautiful and rich that something goes on in everyone's brain.
Yeah.
And I think we're always worried about not understanding something. It's human. It's really human work.
Yeah.
And I think what we're trying to do as a team here, however we've framed it, and I always try to do, is to create the maximum amount of connection with an audience's ability to empathize with what's happening, i.e. to understand it. We will not shut you out. We want you, the audience, are the reason we do this work, after all.
Of course, yeah.
And we want you to go on this journey with us and get this story, and have your own opinions about it, and you should trust that, because there's no right or wrong in that journey. And it's also going to be spectacular to look at, and in its scale. Irish National Opera, it's incredibly brave and important what they're doing, putting 70 essentially mostly Irish and young Irish artists on the stage in a grand opera production is a real statement of intent. And I think that on its own is something that people should come and support, but support with the point of view of that it's going to be a really exciting couple of hours in the theatre.
I think the opera and the theatre is still one of the few things left where we can be completely immersed in something and not be distracted. Like, we're in this world now where there's so many distractions all the time between screens and whatever else. And even if I'm sat at home watching Netflix or watching a movie or something, I'm probably on my phone as well, writing a text, reply to that or whatever. My focus is never quite as intent as it is when I'm at the cinema or at the theatre or at an opera.
Yeah.
There's something much more real and much more connecting about having someone right in front of you as well.
Completely. It's almost the last social place that we come together and something happens live in front of us. And that's priceless, especially in this age as it's being stripped away from us, to actually bond together and say you come into this room with essentially a group of strangers but have all come for the same reason, and the energy of that coming together and sharing a live human performance is completely priceless and enriching in a way that television and Twitter and all that never can be. And I think that's why it's still got the power to transform people, move people, grip people, entertain people, because it's of the sheer collective energy. Audiences, believe me, audience, you are the missing gem in the crown. It is for audiences this work is done. If we did this show with no one in the auditorium, it would be the most stale, dull, pointless piece of work. A film can be broadcast on a wall and nobody needs to see it. It doesn't change, it isn't anything. Whereas a live performance like this only exists in the energy-filled given space by an audience, and that's why it's so thrilling live performance.
And I think that's why performers as well, who work in this field in opera or in theatre, they really switch on and come alive when they have people in front of them, because it is an energy that exchange between both kind of audience and people on stage. Before we wrap up, though, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you have any advice for anyone who might consider down the line going into opera directing? What were the best skills or the best things you could have done or did do on your way into opera? And are there any things that you wish you had done maybe earlier?
There's plenty of those. I think the most important thing you can do is have reverence and respect for the score.
Yeah. Do you read music?
I don't. I mean, I can, but I don't
Yeah.
read it to the complexity and level that you guys do, which I always just find staggering.
But you have an understanding.
I have an understanding
of
it, and I
yeah.
can, if I pick up a score, I can read it in terms of knowing essentially the musical flow of it. But thankfully, in this world, we also have great recordings that help support that, so people like me can get away with that failing. So one of the things I wish I'd done is actually studied more music when I was younger.
Yeah.
But I think the greatest thing you can do is try and tune your mind to truly hearing what the music looks like.
Yeah.
Because music looks like something, and that's the key to directing it. It is implicit in the way it is formed that it has a shape on the stage. And if you go against that, or don't work with that, which I'm afraid a lot of opera directors seem to do, you see work which sounds like X and looks like Y. And our job, Hamlet in Shakespeare said a very simple line. He said, suit the action to the word and the word to the action. It was a request to acting, and it's as true of anything. Our job as directors is sure to make a statement in terms of you have to interpret the work. We are interpretive artists, but you've got to try and interpret within the fullest context of what the genius writer gives you, not try and push that aside and say, I'm more important. So you're a facilitator who should... So it's like training yourself to hear music as a visual thing and to listen to the remarkable nuances that you're given between the various vocal instruments and then in the orchestral work, because 99% of what you need as an opera director is to be found in the score. And if you can do that and are willing to do that with the right level of integrity and humility, then you have a chance of actually producing something fantastic, because everything you need is there. And I think the other side is to really respect the craft. I do think opera is an astonishing act. Every time I come into a rehearsal room and watch singers like yourselves working, I just am overwhelmed with admiration for what it takes to produce that sound, not just the scale of it, but the ability to move it through remarkable levels of tone and shape and tempo, and to be able to take the most precise, direct, should we say, conducting notes that are implicit in the score, and to have to deliver that whilst acting your socks off.
Yeah.
And that's there's a lot of what's like the old pat the top of the head and
rub the
tummy feeling, because there's some way that, and you tell me this, I mean, it's slightly counterintuitive, because I know part of your engine has to constantly be counting time and feeling this and thinking that about the score, whilst trying to be in the moment. And that's immensely challenging.
And motivate everything and follow a conductor and do what the director says.
That's it.
It's like patting the head or rubbing the stomach, maybe doing a side leg raise or something.
But in our world where everything is cheap, everything is throwaway, the kind of, I have to be honest, I despise postmodernism to my core. It's the enemy to me. Is this idea that everything is relative as everything else, blah blah blah. I don't agree with it fundamentally. And opera is one of those things that gives the lie to it, because without the kind of extraordinary skill and craft that you have to still have to work in this profession, the work has, it can't even function without that. Whereas in a lot of contemporary theatre, you can get away with an awful lot of shite now. An awful lot of self-indulgent shite. It's a craft. And I think people love to. I've never once referred to myself as an artist, ever. I'm very nervous of that phrase. It's something you have to earn the right to be, I think, and all great artists were astonishing craftspersons before they became something else. And it's that skill, that technical ability, that sometimes when it all comes together with the right spirit, the right courage and integrity and practice, produces a transcendent experience. But one without the other is, as Shakespeare said, sound and fury signifying nothing.
Okay, my very last question then to you will be, there will no doubt be some singers listening to this, whether they're professionals or starting out, or maybe they're teenagers thinking about going to college. What would you say to those people who walk into an audition room and see a director and a conductor? Obviously, we all know conductors are looking for voices, musicality, all of these things. What do you look for when you sit on an adjudication panel?
Individuality, the courage within the technical requirements of the singing to have a spontaneous, physical, imaginative response to the text and music. That I know a lot of the training can tend to lead to a kind of top-of-the-head reality for singers, that they have to think about so much to create the sound that they lose contact with themselves and their own instrument of performance, which at the end of the day is our body with its internal thoughts, feelings and responses that come through that body. And I think the best thing you can try and do is to have the courage to have a strong idea and go for it. A lot of people come in who audition, I sit in and they sing really nicely, but they make no difference to the room. They don't risk anything in their performance. And a director worth their salts in an audition will always be excited by someone who shows possibility, someone who comes through the audition having been nice and safe, wrapped up and neat and tidy. You see that an awful lot. What you're looking for is that spark in the eye, that sense that even that phrase or those two moments together moved you into being present with them, that you were lost in them whilst singing them perfectly. That's what you look for.
Yeah.
And I think that for opera singers that's not necessarily encouraged, because it's kind of this patty thing. You've got, it's counterintuitive to the technical side, but it's to remember that you're singing, you're being someone who is in that living experience, and to dare to commit to that in an audition. Then you go, oh, well, I can work with that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for sitting down.
Pleasure.
This has been absolutely brilliant. It's time to go back to rehearsals.
Back to rehearsals.
The last two, and then we're into the theatre on Monday.
Can't wait. Come and see us. This group of singers are going to be spectacular. They alone are worth coming to see and hear. So, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the first episode. If you would like to hear more podcasts like this, head over to patreon.com/Irish Opera Podcast and support the podcast for as little as $1 a month, or email irishoperapodcast@gmail.com to make a one-time donation via PayPal. Subscribers on Patreon will receive access to additional content and be entered into competitions announced in future podcasts. There's also an option to become a named sponsor on every episode to show your support or to advertise your business. Don't forget your tickets for Aida, which takes place on Saturday the 24th, Tuesday 27th, Thursday 29th of November and Saturday the 1st of December. Until next time, slán!